Good morning, everybody. Nice to see so many faces on a Tuesday morning. Nice to see faces that are familiar and some new faces as well. Welcome, hi Tim. Welcome to this Sporting Heritage webinar, looking at our new education strategy. For those of you who I've not met before, my name's Fran Stovold and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. And I'm going to be sitting in the background a little bit and doing a little bit of facilitation, but the session is mainly going to be led by my colleague Derek, who will introduce himself in a moment. We've got quite a lot of content to get through today, so we're not going to do an introduction around the screen, but do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat thread, and we will be having breakout rooms a little bit later in the session so that you can get to know each other a little bit better, but also provide feedback on the strategy. Letting final people in. I think that's all I need to say from a housekeeping point of view. We are recording the session, so if you prefer not to be recorded, do by all means switch your cameras off. And the recording will be available on the Sporting Heritage YouTube channel afterwards. We'll also share the slide deck as well. I think, Derek, I will hand over to you to start the session.
Lovely, thank you very much. Morning, everybody. Great to, as Fran has said, see familiar faces, but also new ones as well. That's absolutely wonderful. And thank you for your support. I think Fran underestimates her role in facilitation there. She is absolutely central and critical to this process. So thank you, Fran, and thank you for all of your work as well in coordinating not just this, but a series of many webinars that Sporting Heritage are running during this period. So here we go with the first of the next slides.
Hilary, I think you've actually shared your screen.
I don't know what I'm doing
at the minute. I'm trying
to.
Okay.
I'm going to, without being rude, I'm going to stop your share and start our share, if that's okay.
Okay.
I didn't even know that was possible. So
I was a history teacher, looked more like a geography session to me. So I'm at my desk.
Right, here we go.
Lovely. What's coming next? That's fine. There we go. So back to the future, as we entitle this this particular session, because I guess it is that. It's about looking back and celebrating all that's special in our sporting past and our sporting heritage, but critically how we now look forward, thinking about the future of learning and how sporting heritage can do so much to shape that. Those of you who were expecting an hour and a half's worth of video, sadly, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to have to listen to me for most of it instead. So, Fran, next slide, please. So, I guess it's also back to the future with respect to me as well. My passion for the sporting past and its context goes right back to when I joined Reading Athletics Club. Believe it or not, that is me in the far left-hand corner there at Parliament Hill Fields. I think that's circa 1980, the Southern Boys Cross Country Championship. But my love of sporting past and really getting a sense of where club and school sport came from, I think started then, and subsequently really done much to shape my educational vision. I was a secondary head teacher for 20 years, delighted to have been an ambassador for Sporting Heritage, because I think I've recognised all through my career the difference that sporting history and the associated values can make, both generally in terms of school culture, but very specifically in terms of engagement and excitement of learning. And when I took my early retirement from my headship, and I emphasise early, in September of last year, I guess it was a question of very much the future. And if people have questioned my educational vision in the past from time to time, I do like to tell people I saw this lot coming. Next slide, please, Fran. So in thinking about going back to the future and how we are shaping the future of an educational strategy at Sporting Heritage, I just described myself as a former head teacher and an educational ambassador. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to describe myself as part of Mystic Meg PLC, or indeed the Joker, because I guess any kind of certainties and predictions in this particular environment are something of a challenge. But I think what's been so exciting for me, having really been working in this role since January, is just how much progress we've made so far. And much of that has been down to the absolutely brilliant feedback and networking that we've had through colleagues like yourselves. Those of you who attended the Hangout back in February, hopefully you'll notice already progress that takes account of some of the brilliant ideas that were shared at that session. So it is very much a developmental process, something that we're working on together to shape the future. Thank you, Fran. And it really is that team working that I want to emphasise. This is an educational strategy that has to be developed together, otherwise it won't have the traction, the relevance and the impact that we all hope it will have on learning for our young people and across our wider communities. And I chose this particular picture, it's of Worcester Warriors, because it's got real meaning for me, and I'll pick up on it a little bit later on, and apologies to those of you who were at the Hangout. Two of the young women who are in the forefront of that photo with their backs to us are actually former Park House students, my old school, Park House School in Newbury. I watched them grow from the age of 11 into school-based rugby players, then divisional players, England under-20 internationals. Now those two young women on permanent contracts with Worcester Warriors in their early 20s. And just, you know, a fantastic example, which I'll talk about later, but that whole image, I think, is so important, that this strategy is one, as I've said, that develops together. And we'll already see some of the progress based upon that team working, hopefully in the next hour or so. Thank you, Fran. So to draw on another historical analogy, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's obviously what we aim to do through this session, through this whole process of the development of the strategy. And I'm delighted that we will see the first rollout of programmes and resources, really, I think, from Easter onwards. And it's been a remarkably dynamic and remarkably exciting process. Next slide, please, Fran. So I think what I'd just like you to reflect on for a moment, and perhaps you could just jot some ideas down into the chat box, just so that we can monitor them. And Fran, I'm sure you'll pick up on these as they come in. Is there one really key outcome that you would want to see from today that we can think about? Hopefully they will be covered, but we can also tailor what we look at today and ensure that what you want from today is addressed. So I'll just pause for a moment. And if you'd like to type into the chat box, we'll just monitor that for a moment. What is it that you would really like to take away from today? Fran, I'm not sure if I missed one there. Thank you. Thank you, Jana. How can I support the strategy? Thank you, Tim. I've learned already hugely from you and your outstanding work, which remains for me an inspiration, together with Liz. Brilliant. Thanks, John. Future connectivity. Thank you. Thank you, David. And I should say, you know, your work being featured. Thank you, Brian. Okay, well, thanks very much for that. I'm delighted to see words like support, like partnership, how to set up programs. Yeah, I think much of that we are looking to cover, and certainly I would want to emphasise those themes of partnership and support, because that's very much come through already. So thank you. Hopefully we will cover that. Networking development, absolutely, Richard. And I think networking's been absolutely critical, again, to the progress that we've made so far. Yeah, funding opportunities as well. How can we bring additional capacity in? I think that's very significant. Thank you. Okay, Fran, let's move on. So what I was intending to cover today, and obviously reflecting on what you've just fed in there, how the strategy is developing and an overview of what the current intents are, although it's actually a process that is very much developmental and growing all of the time as a result of those inputs. Share with you current thinking and some of the approaches that we're following so far, but really, and I think critically, to test out some of those current ideas, to elicit your views on whether you feel that what we're doing at the moment reflects the right sort of priorities. Are the resources, the programmes that we're looking at, the right sort of resources? If they're not, what else should we be doing? What should we be doing differently? And what additionally can we bring in terms of support to your outstanding work in this area? We've got that sort of tripartite division of what we want to cover today. So firstly, I want to give an overview of, if you like, the vision for the strategy as it currently stands and some of the objectives in very much headline overview. Apologies for those of you that were part of the hangout a month or so ago. I will be going over some of the ground that I covered there, but I think what's really significant is how that thinking has moved on as a result of your inputs. So next slide, please, Fran. So what is the strategy? What is it in overview? Next slide, please. So I guess the big vision is that what we want is that reflection on the sporting past to excite and engage and inspire learning, to actually create a sense of joy and fun and excitement when young and older people get the opportunity to experience these programs, to motivate, engage, and really want them to learn more. That's what sits at the heart of all of this. Next slide, please. And out of that, the aim is to ensure that sporting heritage is at the forefront of a sustained and innovative thematic programme. And I think what's key in relation to innovation and theme is that it gives the opportunity for these resources, these programmes, to be interpreted by schools and providers in ways that work for them, that you will be giving a core set of resources, exciting, perhaps inspiring, certainly hopefully inspiring, but also giving the school, the organisation, the opportunity to interpret how they wish to use them. And I know we've got John Rye on the webinar this morning, currently at the Hockey Museum, but John and I first met in relation to the Get Set 2012 programme, which was very much a values themed programme. And for me, that was really inspirational and really important, I think, in terms of shaping my vision, because placing values that come through a study of sport and its heritage gives you the opportunity to interpret in different ways, whether that's very specifically to the history curriculum or the personal social development area of a work or of a school, or whether it's an assembly programme. It's that flexibility that I think is so important. Just picking up there, I'm sorry I missed the reference, but one of our colleagues this morning referencing Get Set and its significance when they use that themselves. I think a really interesting programme in terms of creating a sense of what can be achieved. So that's the big aim. That's the big aim of what we want to do. Next slide, please, Fran. And I guess, sitting behind that is, the observation from Mandela, the one that, really comes through, that sport speaks to youth in a language that they understand. In my 34 years of experience in teaching and the 20 years of headship, I guess if I was to pick out two key themes, it's sport and music that probably provide those kind of unifying moments in particular for young people, and really can excite their learning journeys, even if those journeys are then not specifically to do and drilling down into a particular area of sport, but it's the inspiration that it can bring. And I think that that observation about creating unity is significant as well, because I've also seen the very special impact that programs around diversity and inclusion through sporting history, heritage and values themes, the impact that those can have in relation to engaging young people in their learning. Thank you, Fran. Next slide. And I guess as well, this observation from Billie Jean King, I think this was back in 1975, that sports are a microcosm of society. So what wider learning can we bring to our young people? What wider reflections from this study of sporting heritage, which will help to shape them as responsible young citizens of the future as they reflect on the challenges and the opportunities, the continuities and the changes and the work that's still to be done in our society today through learning and through learning about sporting heritage and sporting history. So it's that vision and those aims that's then sit beneath the specifics of what we're trying to do. Fran, I'll just pause there for a moment to pick up on anything that you've seen coming through the chat. Is there anything we can pick up on there?
Yes, there's some interesting things that have come in about talking about the role of sport and music together. Both Darren over in Wales and Joanna at Tottenham have talked about, have put in comments about how they can be paired together. So that would be an interesting one to pick up on. And Ellery said indeed. So yes, I think that's definitely something worth exploring.
That's fascinating, and I'm thrilled that we've got David Gleave with us this morning, and I'll reference some of the inspiration that's come from David's work, really very much from the last networking session that we had, that's inspired a piece of work. And there's some brilliant, and David can speak far more eloquently about it than I can, some brilliant work there around football's black pioneers, which I'm sure we'll pick up on later. And Tim, yes, your observation, I think that there's been some amazing work around theatre with Ipswich as well, which I'm sure we can share later on. And again, been an inspiration to me when I've been talking to other. Angie's comment about sport and the wider performing arts. I'm only seeing the first lines, I'm afraid, Fran. What was the?
Yes, so Angie said, sport and the wider performing arts, music and dance. We are looking at the, and apologies if I pronounced this incorrectly, Haka for the Rugby League World Cup. Brilliant.
Yeah, and all of the cultural connotations around that, a study of All Blacks rugby, a massive opportunity there. I think as well, you begin to think about opening ceremonies, different opening ceremonies, and the way in which they can be interpreted.
And then, yes, Joanna has said about looking at lyrics in chants and songs as part of the literacy curriculum. And then Brian has said that, yes, that he helped support write the sporting resources for Hull City of Culture in 2017, and would be interested in being involved in any prep required for Birmingham 2022.
That's absolutely brilliant. And I think when one thinks about the diversity of the community in Birmingham and what 2022 offers there, I think that's absolutely amazing. And that point, and it's been so well made there, that whilst we are starting with the study of sporting heritage and the sporting past, clearly there are so many areas of the curriculum that we can access here. And just that reference earlier to literacy within the English curriculum, I think there are huge opportunities here. And I think we can pick a lot of these up perhaps in the chat rooms later on as well. And already the feedback's been remarkable, so thank you so much. That's brilliant. Sorry if I've missed anything, but we are recording. We'll pick up on all of the notes later on, and perhaps during the breakout session, Fran, there'll be the opportunity, yes, for us to reflect a little bit there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Can we move on? So in terms of the objectives of the strategy, some are quite specific and clearly reflect some of the funding, which particularly relates to work with Sport England. But I guess in the first instance, this has been about looking at a clear strategic plan and then a practical delivery plan. I was hugely excited and inspired by the work of Sporting Heritage in an educational setting when I guess I first came across it actually through a tweet. I don't know what that was, 3 or 4 years ago now, and saw some of the work that was already going on in education, thought it was absolutely brilliant. But I guess by default, that was more ad hoc. There wasn't, and this is that there wasn't the planned coherence to that because there was nobody in place to actually do that. So this is an opportunity to think about how we have a developmental strategy and clear and time-bonded delivery plan to ensure that we can communicate the resources that are actually going to be out there. The second point, and this session is very much part of that, how do we develop the partnerships and the networks that are going to draw on the richness of what's already out there, what's being done, but to add additional value? And I keep saying it, but it's really important. The massive amount of influence that the last hangout session a month ago has had on our thinking has been really, really significant in moving us forward. And it's these sorts of sessions, and in the first, whatever it is, 20 minutes or so, my thinking's already moving in all sorts of different directions. Clearly, it's about increasing the delivery of programs and activities and making those accessible to providers in ways in which are useful to them. And that, of course, is about producing really outstanding resources on themes which might start with a very local emphasis or might already be quite global in their nature, but critically are flexible and transferable across settings and can be used in all sorts of different ways, whether it's, as I've said, an assembly stimulus, whether it's part of a personal development programme, whether it's specifically part of national curriculum delivery in a variety of subject areas, whether it's aligned to the PE curriculum and widening and enriching learning there, whether it's part of extended learning. And I think we're seeing, aren't we, as a result of the pandemic, more extended use of holiday time around curriculum enrichment. So masses of opportunities there in which we can use these resources creatively to make a difference. Next slide, please, Fran. There's a particular objective around working with the national governing bodies of sport on how their collections and heritage can deliver educational outputs. Particular interest from Sport England on the medium to smaller size national governing bodies. Fran, I'm going to pause there. There is a webinar later in the series, isn't there, that's particularly looking at the role of governing bodies, national governing bodies as well, I believe.
Well, we're doing some work with the national governing bodies through the Sport England project, and actually we're getting together what we're calling our heritage champions, who are formerly, sometimes we call them ambassadors. So I think we're getting them together in the first instance, and then there will be more discussion about how people can work with national governing bodies a bit later in the year. So yes. Thank you.
And I know that's a related element of my work, working with other colleagues in Sporting Heritage to draw out those connections. Particular piece of work around the power of Sporting Heritage to re-engage perhaps learners who may have struggled or found certain elements of the curriculum challenging. This whole piece around sharing knowledge, expertise, advice and guidance and being a conduit for that. And clearly there's already masses of that in the chat box from this morning that we will want to be collating and sharing. And and part of this role and part of the reason for these sessions is to connect colleagues who are already undertaking really special work in this area, so that you can learn from one another and share the practice that's going on and share the inspiration. Next slide, please, Fran. Clearly, it's about also thinking about the resources that we can find to ensure sustainability, thinking creatively here, and also thinking creatively in relation to the programmes that we introduce through Sporting Heritage, but also what does that mean in terms of more physical activity and more participation of young people. Obviously, lots of data coming through around the negative impact that the pandemic has had on young people's physical participation, physical activity. So how can this be a stimulus, working together with subject associations and obviously specifically those in relation to the delivery of PE in school, to promote excitement in a sport and then get the young people to have the taste or opportunities to participate in it. Very specifically, on the 30th of September each year, we have National Sporting Heritage Day, which is an opportunity for organisations to come together to celebrate the innovative work, the exciting work that they do to engage their communities. And we've got a specific objective to look at how we can engage schools even more in this process through a variety of programmes and incentives. I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail later on. Next slide, please, Fred. So, I don't know whether we missed one there, but it's, yeah, so in terms of what we want from this, it's a very clear 3-year strategy with an associated delivery plan, which is really, really clear. You know, much of the last 20 years of my life was driven by improvement planning, but I think with very good reason. Of course, those plans get adjusted, they get changed, but it's very much to have that sense of direction of where you're going. Of course, you may take your journey might weave in and out a little bit, but ensuring that you get to those key points at the end is absolutely critical. And we will really want to be sharing the time frames for the delivery of these programs and these resources, so that colleagues are really clear when they will be accessible and what they can learn from them and how they can share them. Part of that has been undertaking the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats analysis to look at where actually there may be gaps. We may already be doing things quite effectively, but where critically we can learn and be more creative. Thanks, Fran. Next slide. So this really is key to the process, as I've said, and potential policy and delivery partners and funders, and these initial partnership discussions that we've been undertaking really by the end of February, although this forms part of an extended process and will be an ongoing process, but huge benefits from the number of colleagues we've already been talking to. Next slide, please, Fran. And just to give some examples of where those conversations have been going, critically and clearly Sport England, because of the emphases that we've already raised. The Historical Association, which has a key reach into schools. It's the leading professional association for teachers of primary and secondary history, and really important that we're looking to work collaboratively there. Particularly discussions around some joint programs of study, and also writing pieces for a number of their journals to emphasise the significance of this area of work in engaging young people. The Youth Sport Trust, I mean, I've been privileged to work with the Youth Sport Trust for over 20 years. The Youth Sport Trust formally coordinated the work of what was there in the end, sort of 600 plus schools that were associated with the sports colleges movement, when schools could be specialist schools, through from the mid-90s through to 10 years or so ago. Critical body in galvanising young people, schools, teachers, educators around the power of sport and physical activity to change young people's lives. Some great progress with the RFU, the Rugby Museum, and I'll talk about those girls and women's programmes a little bit later on. Privileged to have the conversations with John and the work of the Hockey Museum, whose work's already very significant and very advanced. We've got some key pieces of work that are coming out around girls cricket, coinciding with the World Cup. The BCF is the Berkshire Cricket Foundation, obviously the English Cricket Board, and we'll also reference work that Fran was involved in. And I think Chris from Yorkshire Cricket is certainly, attending part of this call. There were some brilliant resources there that came out, and we'll talk about a little bit later on. The Association of for PE Teachers, the British Society of Sports Historians, great to see Richard here again, link into the particularly the university. Rounders England, some fantastic work there. Talk about that later around their values. Inspired by a contact I had from a bowls club that's local to me about the work that they've done through the pandemic in keeping the communities together, and a wider piece of work around Bowls England. Active partnerships, or the county sports partnerships, 40 plus of them across England, which are bringing together clubs, schools, communities around sport and physical activity, a key network for us to look at. GBA is Get Berkshire Active, my own local active partnership, privileged to have worked with them, particularly in my role on the school games. The School Games Organisers Network, amazing groups of colleagues, many of them attached to schools, who are involved particularly in working across networks of primary schools, but secondary schools as well, to roll out all sorts of programmes, work around basketball. And lastly, a really interesting project here, I'll talk about it again in a moment, Families on Track with Paula Radcliffe, which is to the school communities through the School Games Network, but has got some really interesting intergenerational aspects to it. So those conversations, and the conversations are growing all the time, have led to some really... Next slide, please, Fran. And just to pick up then on the Families on Track project, because I think it is a really interesting one. I was privileged to do some work with Paula Radcliffe prior to the pandemic, for a number of years actually, particularly on a programme called Families on Track, which is about Paula encouraging families to exercise together, to run together, not in any competitive way, but to look at the whole sort of social context, community context for families exercising together. Clearly that's been put on hold during the pandemic. So we had a further conversation. We came up with the 2:15 challenge over half term. Paula's world record, as you recall, was 2 hours 15 minutes for the marathon. So this was a challenge for families to exercise together for 2 hours and 15 minutes as creatively as they wanted to, and to record that challenge however they felt was appropriate photographically. It was allied to a school competition. The most active families within schools win an assembly, virtual assembly with Paula. 10,000 young people engaged across Berkshire during the half-term holiday. And we're now building that through to getting back to a real-time Families on Track programme. But critically, from the point of view of this presentation, what we're also looking at is how this opens up conversations around intergenerational themes. Young people talking to their parents, their grandparents, about what inspired them to get involved with sport. So there's going to be a rollout around Paula's work here, which I think is quite an interesting one, and something that's developed very, very quickly in terms of conversations that have gone on just a matter of weeks ago. Next slide, please. And something that came out of the School Games Network. and conversations just after the last hangout, why not think about the traditional games that have gone on in primary playgrounds that maybe in an age where young people spend far too much time involved in a virtual world? Why don't we think about some of those traditional games, do some research there, and think about how we can recreate those, as well as in undertaking the heritage background to them. And that's something that the School Games Network, certainly in Berkshire, are looking to roll out. Next slide, please, Fran. So just moving on then, in terms of very specifically performance indicators by way of resource, a minimum of at least 12, and the way things are going, I think there will be significantly more than that, resources that will be available to be used across the curriculum. It says Key Stage 2, 3. I mean, we can go back to Key Stage 1 and into Key Stage 5, into the sixth form as well, and that will have a thematic focus. And also a specific set of resources that will link to Sporting Heritage Day, and how we can help to structure involvement in that day on the 30th of September through ongoing support and inspiration and excitement about how schools can work within their local communities, or indeed independently, to celebrate sporting heritage. Next slide, please, Fran. So this is part very much of the process of communication. We will have, during the course of this year, 4 webinars and virtual insets. Obviously, this is the first of our formal webinars. We've had a hangout already, but as the programme develops, and Fran, you may want to comment here as well. I think we'll look to some more specific insets and webinars on specific programmes and resources. We've done that successfully in the past with some of the resources that you were involved in developing, I know.
Yes, there's scope to put things into the calendar. Yes, definitely. We'll depending on the interest that come out of this webinar, we can then look at programming things in for a bit later in the year.
Absolutely, because I think, thank you. You know, one of the points is this isn't about pushing out, you know, a series of PowerPoint resources or teachers' guides. It's about being interactive to ensure that they're having impact and we modify them in the context of feedback. Already some interest that's come through on the idea of a virtual network where we can share ideas in this way, in a different, you know, in a similar sorts of format, but perhaps allow some specific focus on specific resources. And then keeping people clearly up to date with regular newsletter input and articles and podcasts. And there is a monthly Sporting Heritage newsletter, which you can access via the website. It's also through sort of social media platforms as well, full of you know, interesting ideas, and education will feature in those newsletters monthly. There'll be updates about what's coming out, what's available. Next slide, please, Fran. So financially, clearly I'm a resource, and you know, I can be used and I can be deployed in terms of developing ideas that you've got and thinking about how they can be brought to fruition. But also this is about scanning the horizon for additional funding sources, looking at where sporting heritage as a whole can generate bids, or to support you with writing bids to secure additional investment. Next slide, please, Fran. So out of all of that, key themes: working in partnership. This is part of that process, and gaining from all of the benefits from the expertise that you already have that's out there, the amazing work that you're doing. Specifically generating resources, wide-ranging but particular focus on women and girls, diversity and inclusion, with that link to increasing participation. Looking at where appropriate we accredit the learning of young people. Richard will in particular be aware of this work, the work with the EPQ, the extended project qualification, an A-level qualification worth half A-level points. Talk about it more a little bit later, with sixth formers where they can undertake independent research into a sporting heritage themed project. Work I've just been undertaking with an organisation called ASDAN, who customise accredit work and work programs in school. So if you have a project that you're already undertaking and it involves working with young people, if ASDAN, effectively an exam awarding body, see that it has rigour and integrity and is linked to areas of the curriculum, it can actually be accredited by them. And again, this can lead to young people in the sixth form actually gaining UCAS points that count towards their university offers. But it can be certificated at any level in the school. So maybe this is something that will also incentivise great learning that's going on. So that's something that I can talk about both collectively and individually if it's an area of interest. And lastly, this focus around Sporting Heritage Day competitions and how we think about themed engagement of schools. So those are, I think, the sort of the key headline themes that come out and will be reflected in the delivery plan. Next slide, please, Fran. So appropriately, how's that? What do you make of that as the initial starting point for our strategy and our delivery plan? Next slide, please, Fran. So really, this is where I want to stop talking and pass over to you in breakout rooms for you to think about three key questions. From what I've spoken about this morning already, and indeed what we've seen come through the chat, are these themes and priorities the right ones? What out of what you've heard about so far would be most useful to you, but what else would you want to see, or what would you want to see that's different from what I've articulated already? So it's really the opportunity to reflect on what you've just seen and heard and think about, does that work? Does that sound right? Is that useful for me? What else would I want to see? And I guess from those conversations that we've seen coming through in the chat, how can I help and what can I contribute to? So this is where I pass over to Fran and her expertise to send you away for, I think we're going to talk about 15 minutes or so, Fran.
Yes, I was about to start chatting and I was on mute. So I'm going to pop everybody into breakout rooms. You should see in a couple of moments an invite to join a breakout room. If you click on it, you'll disappear into your room with a number of other people on the call. I think you're all in rooms of about 5 or 6 people. You can talk through those 3 questions. While you're in your room, if you could choose a willing volunteer to feed back to the group when we come back. And yes, so we're on 11:15 now, so I'll bring everybody back at 30:30. And you'll get a sort of a 60-second countdown as well, so you know when to bring your discussions to a close. So I'm just going to send you your breakout room invites now. See everybody in 15 minutes. Lovely, good to see everybody back. I hope you had a good 15 minutes of chat. When you get chatting, 15 minutes doesn't last that long, does it? I'm sure everybody had lots to say. So I'm going to try my hardest not to pick on people. So I'm going to name a couple of people who were in each room, and you can either do the feedback yourselves, or you can hand over to whoever your nominated person was. So in room 1, so this is the room that had Brian and Joanna and John and Stephen. If somebody from that room could feedback on those 3 questions.
Yeah, I took notes. Do you want me to feedback on all 3 questions?
Yes, if you could, yes, that would be great.
Okay, I'll be as succinct as possible, but my pencil was on fire.
Well, if there's anything that for everybody else who's in your group, if there's anything that John doesn't cover, if you can pop it in the chat so that we've got it recorded and so that we can come back and pick up on it. So so then the pressure isn't all on John to relay every single moment.
He's good under pressure.
Yeah, and that goes for everybody else. So yes, you by all means be succinct. Over to you, John.
I think it was good in terms of our group was fairly honest from the outset. We noted that obviously there were around 10 objectives, priorities that were listed out, and for some it was kind of a whistle-stop tour on those priorities. So some of the group didn't necessarily have kind of evolved thoughts around the priorities and the discussions, but our discussion was around almost the next step, which we know you're not yet at, but it's the devil in the detail. How some of the activities will be funded, and that might be that you've already got the funding in place. It might be that it's being drawn down from other means. and also the link into partner organisations and how can we get hold of some additional funding to support both in terms of the strategy but also the work that we're doing. A theme that came up throughout was around ensuring that whatever programs, resources are developed by both Sport and Heritage as part of the strategy, but also as part of our organisations, how can we get those into schools? How can we ensure that they're not sat on that shelf, that electronic shelf, and never used by the young people? Because that would be a massively missed opportunity. Brian said about converting the unconverted. And I thought that's a really good point in terms of the educational establishment of making sure that we can get in through the gatekeeper to the right people. Another interesting point was from a couple in the group around the word education, and I guess it comes from different viewpoints from either an educational stance or a museum stance, and where can we within the strategy find the midway point to engage as many young people, but also staff and learners as possible. And that was the key one, was learning interpretation as opposed to formal education. Where can we have, as Ellery put, the curiosity and joy of discovering through our learning opportunities as opposed to the formal education programs. We talked about kind of the second question about the most useful out of those objectives, and as many as people could remember, the best practice examples was obviously a good one in sharing that, and I know we discussed that within the Hangout as well. The formal and informal learning opportunities that come through the programs, the resources or the directed opportunities, advocacy to educational establishments, but then also the reverse of that in terms of being able to develop our projects and resources and linking them into what's going on within the educational environments and making sure that we all understand what's happening at the coalface of education. And just 2 points from our group in terms of anything different or else we could look at. The consideration around each nation's curriculum, and it's very different and very different stages of education, and making sure that we take that into consideration, whether those resources are directly targeted to one particular nation or across the UK. And then also a possibility of English as an additional or English as a second language, and making sure that we can link into the community and the school opportunities that are being offered, and our resources that we can offer to those groups as well.
Lovely, thanks, John. Yeah, that's quite a comprehensive.
Absolutely brilliant. Some very immediate feedback. So I obviously want to hear everybody else and just conclude in the other areas. I mean, in terms of funding, those resources that are being centrally developed by Sporting Heritage, i.e., me, will be free to for provision. Those won't be charged. The point about creating a conduit, and a point at which these can be logged, I think, is really important. And there's ongoing liaison with the regions within Sporting Heritage to ensure relevance and traction in those areas, which I think is a really important point as well. Thank you, that was brilliantly helpful.
Yeah.
Lovely. So moving on to room 2. So this is the room that had Andrew and Darren and Esther and Richard in. So I don't know who your nominated speaker is.
Tim. It was me who did mention from you, Fran, but I was there honest. I was so confident I wouldn't be asked to do the notes. I didn't have pen and paper, so I'm reading off my phone screen. Okay. Sometimes, Derek, I think the repetition is actually a matter of consistency rather than repetition. So forgive me if I cover a couple of points already said. And beyond that, of course, I do think it's sometimes wrong to be constrained by any kind of framework, let alone the questions you actually ask. So these are the points we've come up with, and it's up to you as to whether you think they're relevant or not. It's actually a few bullet points. We had a brilliant conversation, and I've learned quite a few things actually just in that, and not only that Welsh people don't only eat Welsh cake in their sandwiches as well. But first of all, serious point on terminology. Using the key stage terminology, Wales is actually moving away from this to something called learning steps. Quite important to make sure that therefore we're not national in our use of terminology, because that would make it appear out of date in some parts of the UK. Then Richard threw in a TLA that I wasn't aware of. EPQ, Extended Project Qualification. Is that right, Richard?
Yeah, that's correct.
A qualification to essentially we were talking here about using students to do research for a history or heritage society within a sports club, which is benefit obviously to both the sporting organisation and to the student. And Richard said, yeah, if you do that within the framework of the extended qualification project qualification for A level, that can help the student to get their points to improve their grades. Not
spot on.
Something we've never come across, but it sounds blooming brilliant. Comment made that HLF are happy to support community heritage projects, and we were looking here at interpretation boards at local sports clubs, including a QR code to delve in more deeply and actually going beyond the sport that the sport club itself might represent to show other community sports, and gave us the thought that equally that could apply to schools as well, and that seemed interesting. Another comment on research, that university students are constantly looking for research topics. We have lots of research topics between us, don't we? But it's very difficult at the moment where their access to materials can be very, very limited. Access to people is very limited. So the more that we're able to benefit from research materials, pictorial words, all the rest of it that are available online, making people aware of how they can get hold of materials online, then the more that's going to promote the study of sporting heritage within the educational context. That seems not only perhaps so obvious that we completely overlooked it. And a final point on networking, that anything that works, for example, at Key Stage 2, 3 in one part of the country, in one place, in one sporting club, in one school, is of course going to be interesting, relevant, and potentially applicable pretty much anywhere else, which utterly underlines the importance of networking, a group like this, and indeed, Fran, Derek, people like yourselves that can be absolutely at the heart of what we're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. A little bit more on the EPQ later on, but that application is a really interesting one. And thank you for that point around avoiding any terminology that might appear therefore to limit access, and that's a really, really important point, so thank you.
Credit there to Richard and to Esther who made those points.
Thank you Richard, thank you Esther.
Glad that there's been a little bit of cultural exchange helping the English-Welsh relationships along there as well. And it's a good point that you raised about the funding from Heritage Fund at the moment. I don't know if anybody's looked at the new guidance that's come out from Heritage Fund. Although obviously they are still funding heritage, they're very much looking at heritage and how it links out to community, environment, sustainability. So if you've got that community element, that's something that they're particularly keen on at the moment. Right. So
and just to emphasise, I am half Welsh, so noted.
Moving on, but last but no means least, to room 3. So this is the room that had Angie and David and Liz and Hilary in. So who's nominated to speak for you guys?
I don't mind speaking.
Thanks, Angie.
Thank you.
It's a really nice group of people, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about our backgrounds and what our focuses are. And 2 of the participants had a focus on black football and the issue around black people in sport at the moment. One of which is a writer/author. One of our colleagues was new to sporting heritage, and I'm only within the last year a link to sporting heritage, and mine's rugby league. In terms of the key focuses, your first speakers covered quite a few of those. The one that's key is funding, and looking at funding, and with some new projects in terms of women and the physical disability inclusion agenda there for sporting heritage, and also networking, sharing ideas with other people is key. So again, to avoid repetition and to partnership with people. And you mirror that, don't you, by partnerships yourselves, and then you go into education and work with young people, and you mirror that kind of teamwork partnership as well. So that's from me. I don't know if anybody else in the group would like to add anything.
David, right at the very end, I think it was you that made a point about working at the other end of the age spectrum from where I normally think, i.e. going into care homes and talking to people in care homes about.
Oh yes.
It's not something I'd ever,
Yeah.
something I'd never thought about. I don't quite know how it would work, but I thought that was a kind of interesting new dimension. And I think Derek did mention sort of the idea of working across generations, and that seemed perfect, really. That was all.
Excellent. And Sporting Heritage are doing quite a lot on memories. We've been developing a memories handbook toolkit based on the work that's been taking place in Scotland. And we're just putting together a national memories approach to memories work, which is being led by Hugh Dan McLennan and Michael White, who've been working on the Scottish project. So once that's a bit further developed, there'll be more information about that. So that may help support that work. David, Tim, you wanted to say?
Just picking up on that, and Liz and myself are doing work with Sporting Memories, running Sporting Memories locally. Yeah. It just struck me, in those enlightened parts of the country that have an active U3A, University of the Third Age, heritage would be a fascinating subject for classes, and I think it would attract a huge number of people, and it's not an angle I'd ever considered. So thank you for even mentioning that side of things.
Brilliant suggestion.
We'll pass the baton on to Liz. Liz, what would you like to say?
I was just going to raise on the care home point. There are a number of care homes that actually work with local schools as well. So the children go in and will do activities, people in the care homes, be it around singing or sporting activity. And there's no reason why you couldn't extend that to Sporting Heritage and get children talking to the elderly people about their sporting memories and so on.
Yeah, absolutely not, an absolutely brilliant, another perfect intergenerational piece, I think. And as you rightly say, I mean, certainly when I was in a school that I was at, we worked very, very closely with local, they go in, they do the Christmas concert, they do the Easter concert. Why don't they go in and talk about themes in this particular way? As we said, music and sport, wonderful.
And am I right? I'm sorry, David. Am I right in thinking that as part of your work, Derek, you're gathering case studies? We're just talking about sharing examples and work. So there will be case studies that come out of this piece of work. Yeah. And I don't know if there is scope to do talking about mapping resources, and when people are talking about avoiding sort of duplication, whether it's worth doing a mapping exercise so that we can see what people have worked on before, because there'll be good models of working and people's, it sort of links in with the case study idea.
That 15 minutes worth of feedback has helped me enormously, and clearly reflection on the recording, and Fran's capturing all the comments that have already been made and additional comments. This will be of huge importance. Fran, should we just with sort of 10 or so minutes to go, just go back to the presentation? Yes, and I'll and then, because we just want to allow also just a few moments at the end for reflection. Thank you all so much for that. That's been massively helpful. So if we go to the next slide, so just really some examples of work in progress, so you can just see a little bit more, and I will rattle through these. Next slide, please, Fran. So the model at the moment for the sort of the core resources are around these theme materials, as I've said already, for flexible use, noting that we will reference around what terminology we use, accompanied by a teacher's or a user's guide. But also with indications about where additional value can be added. Next slide, please, Fran. So this is the one that I referenced that we're developing on women's rugby with Worcester Warriors. There's Cara and Caris. Next slide, please, Fran. I said I'd known them since they were 11, so that's them at school, involved in various activities. So what we're going to do is build from their personal journeys through the sport into something wider. You can see you've got Zinzan Brook there, and people mentioned the hacker. I'll never forget that. He came into school and led a hacker. That was culturally very significant, because there is a sensitivity about when hackers take place, but he did one at school and it was absolutely amazing. Next slide, please, Fran. So from those young, those young women's personal journeys in the 2000s, and they're in their 20s, what we'll do is then go back and think about wider questions around equalities and access, go right back to the origins of the game, a version of the women's game called Beret in the late 19th century. Ask questions about, what's changed, what's different, what's the same, where are there still challenges, but link that as well to local women's rugby and girls rugby festivals, assuming, that what we have done is sparked interest in the game. Next slide, please, Fran. Paralleling that with cricket, been very fortunate to conduct an interview with Charlotte Edwards, England's amazing captain, probably one of our greatest women's players of all time. We're interspersing that interview with those with young players that are coming through the game, girls at school are on that trajectory, again picking out key themes. Next slide, please, Fran. Looking at the past, present and the future of the game. Next slide, please, linking to the World Cup. Very fortunate that Ralph Nicholson, some of you will know Ralph, she's a key figure in the British Society of Sports Historians, and I think probably the greatest expert on the women's game in the world. She's actually going to narrate that for us. There's some fantastic work going on there. And again, we'll have a cricket festival linked to that. Next slide, please, Fran. And this is where I call on David, because David's inspiration here. I've got the book in front of me. You can see the book there. I must have had, I don't know how many emails, David, conversations with you about the amazing work that you've done, and we've got 3 particular focuses and case studies that are coming out initially from the work that you've already undertaken, and also a great opportunity, particularly in relation to Jack Leslie, who linked to Plymouth, and we're going to be working with colleagues there around a virtual or an actual exhibition as well. David, do you want to unmute and say anything briefly there?
Well, only to say that a colleague and I started writing a book about black footballers, and we thought it would only really be of much interest to football fans. Bristol Rovers' first black player, etc. Who was it? That's very interesting. Move on. Actually, as we researched the stories, we were astonished at the diversity of the stories we came up. We were, I suppose, not quite as astonished about the levels of racism that some of these early players faced, and how they had to overcome hurdles that perhaps even modern day players wouldn't even dream of. Our concern really was that some of these pioneers were going to be lost to history because people were just going to forget about them. I'll say it was only almost by accident that we've uncovered what we think is a fantastic educational tool, and I'm very happy to be working with Derek on trying to bring that to fruition for teachers to use.
Thank you, David. Absolute privilege to be doing this, and we're looking to develop those resources and have those, ready by the start of the summer term, if possible, maybe slightly later. But it's an inspirational piece of work and absolutely brilliant. Thank you, David. Next slide, please, Fran. An example of one of the national governing bodies' work there. Rounders are very much focusing on the values of Rounders: fair play, respect, teamwork, winning behaviour and fun. So what we're doing there is, again, looking at the history and the heritage, interviewing former and current players to look at those values. They've produced some brilliant PE resources as well that we'll look to interlink there so that they're integrated in terms of physical activity and history and heritage resource. Next slide, please, Fran. 3 that we, because Fran was very much involved in this process as well, prepared earlier, just to give an example. Next slide, please, Fran. This was the Yorkshire cricket work. So these were resources around the PSHE programme that we linked to the PSHE guidance. The inspiration of others, standing on the shoulders of giants, were about Hutton and Sutcliffe. Next slide, please, Fran. What the team working element, stories from the local Yorkshire clubs, can tell us about the significance of working as a team. Next slide, please, Fran. And what you can see there, there was also a piece on Headley Verity and the concept of resilience. But there's the sort of what we look to do. Here's the teacher's notes that go with that, the overview, the aims that link to the curriculum. Next slide, please, Fran. And then where they link to the specific areas of that curriculum. Next slide, please, Fran. And then where there are opportunities to interpret that work. You know, I started a bit with, you know, with a bit of Westlife on that when you raised me up. You know, I won't offer any rendition here, but you might choose to start in different sorts of ways and so forth. A key stage 2 resource that we're looking to develop, inspired by the Museum of the Olympics and Sport in Qatar. Got the privilege of doing some work with them at the moment. The most amazing museum, but a key stage 2 piece of work that we're looking at with the, and reference to learning steps as well moving forward, to look at how this might be a unit of work that links to the ancient Greeks, but also move forward in terms of turning points, mid-19th century and beyond, around designing, you know, what a virtual museum would look like. Next slide, please, Fran. And a reference here to some amazing work that a colleague at Sporting Heritage has produced, Jessica Hartson, rolled out very recently, and I think proved very, very popular, particularly during lockdown, about how a 3D museum can be constructed. Some brilliant work there that Jess is doing, and I think you can get reference to that on the Sporting Heritage website. Next slide, please, Fran. Here's the EPQ piece then, the extended project qualification. You can be studying maths, physics and chemistry at A level, but be really excited about sport. You might love a particular sport, you might love the history of sport, you might be interested in a local club. And the comments from Richard Group took this into a different direction for me already. It's worth half UCAS points. So basically, it's worth half an A level and can be the difference between a young person getting a place at university or not. They generate a research question, write a 5,000-word essay and make a presentation on it. Now, that brilliant opportunity that was referenced there earlier would be to work with local clubs, local communities, local museums to think about how those questions are formulated. Next slide, please, Fran. I have been working on a guidance resource for schools and teachers and young people, but we can broaden this based upon what you said earlier. And we're looking at creating forums to help young people to formulate their questions. We're going to make use of the skills that we've got at Sporting Heritage to actually support those young people in their research skills and potentially offer bespoke guidance and mentoring for students once they've formulated their questions. You know, this is an area that can be of huge value to schools, to young people, but also can engage you and the wider community in this work. Next slide, please, Fran. And then I think penultimately, this idea of the Sporting Heritage Day competition, could we push out packs that talk about this intergenerational project? How brilliant, as was mentioned earlier by Tim and Liz, following on from that group discussion, why not actually have a project around virtually, or actually, if it's possible, working with your local care home on a project of particular relevance? A project, you know, might be specifically around diversity or women's sport. What about your own school sporting heritage? You know, where can you go back into your own traditions at school, or work with your local community club, museum, an individual to generate a project for Sporting Heritage Day? More guidance to follow. Next slide, please, Fran. Phew. Over to you again with 5 minutes to go. Just an opportunity there to illustrate some of the work that's going on. Clearly, the direction of that work has been influenced by what you've referenced this morning. Fran, if we've literally got a couple of minutes for any very immediate feedback, but there will be an invitation when we finish to email us. We've got contact details. In fact, we'll pull that slide up when we finish. Contact details, be delighted to respond individually to you to move things forward. It's exactly what happened with David after the last hangout, and how we've already got that brilliant work developing around football's Black Pioneers. Anything at all that anybody would like to pick up either on the chat or very briefly, because I'm conscious that many of you may be going on to other commitments or meetings after this.
While everybody's thinking, I'll just say that I'll save all the comments that have been made in the chat and circulate them as part of the wrap up after this session, because there are all sorts of ideas, and I know that people have sort of been making links with each other. So I'll make sure that's all circulated in case you haven't captured it during the session. But yes, any final comments as we're 2 minutes to go?
I'll start, Fran. Actually, I mean, my thought from this is there's been so much value that it would be. Thank you. I think it would be brilliant, you know, perhaps if we look at the overall schedule and then to reconvene with a follow up on the leads that have come out of this, and then you know potentially where we've got to and then where we need to go, because this has been hugely valuable to me, and I can't thank you enough for, you know, the comments that have come through this morning.
And will then be, I know that you mentioned it in your slides, I know there's been some discussion about creating a network. So will we be able to share details of what that might look like?
Very much so.
Well,
and I guess
be interested in having a network that looks at learning and education.
Perhaps if you would like to wave your actual hand or waver the virtual hand, if that would be of interest. Thank you. Brilliant.
Great. I would imagine it will come out in the Sporting Heritage newsletter, and everybody who's interested will be able to join in whatever,
yeah, I mean,
whether it's an e-list or a Facebook group or a JISC mail, we'll work out what works best, because that would be a great way to share other examples in between all these meetings, and also to help us if we're going to do some of the mapping of what resources exist already. It'd be great for people to sort of point us in the direction if you've come across something great, or you'd like to share your own work. That would be really helpful.
We will pick up on the comments that I see that are coming through the forum. My contact, because I'm not sure we want to move away from the screen necessarily again, is, I don't know, Fran, whether the last slide, is it worth just pulling it up with the emails on?
Can do.
I'm just being told I should be in another meeting. I'm going to ignore that. Sorry if you saw that.
There we are.
So if you use the dpeople at icloud.com, but what I will do, and in fact the piece I will write for the next newsletter, because I know that's got to be available by Friday, and it'll come out, I think it's the 25th, isn't it, Fran? Is share these details, because I would hugely value the opportunity to continue these conversations both individually and collectively. I can't thank you enough for the steer that you've given and sharing your expertise.
Lovely. So if I bring the session to a close, so thank you everybody for your time today and for all your feedback. I'll share Derek's slide deck and everything that's come through in the chat, and then hopefully we'll be able to reconvene in the not too distant future to discuss this further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.